We have Divyesh Jadev from IBM, who manages the Applied Intelligence Research Department at the Almaden Research Center. He received an MA and PhD from Syracuse University in computer engineering. His recent work focuses on designing and building end-to-end solutions at the confluence of mobility, artificial intelligence, IoT, and blockchain. He's a member of the IBM Academy of Technologies, published over 20 technical papers, and holds 27 patents. And he represents IBM on the MOBI VID working group and electric vehicle and grid integration. So welcome. Richard Meszaros from Accenture is a managing director. Rich is the global lead for IoT and connected commerce, focusing on designing, enabling, and optimizing new commerce models in the emerging connected world. Rich has an MBA from the University of Minnesota, Carlson, and has held a number of senior executive positions in fintech. Ann Smith, head of mobility and automotive at IOTA. Her responsibilities include identification and qualification of strategic partnerships, as well as the development of go-to-market strategies with IOTA's partners. Ann has a math degree from UCSC in Santa Cruz, and her experience includes IP security testing, software, hardware quality management, IoT, and networking with some of the largest global tech, software, and telecom companies. And lastly, Dr. Bin Zhao from CPChain. Dr. Zhao has more than 12 years of research and development experience in fields of communications and IoT and fintech, with extended experience in R&D, team management. He also has three patents for inventions in the field of IoT technology. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today in the last slot before lunch. What I wanted to start with, so that was my introduction of you. I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourselves, maybe starting with Ann. What didn't I say? Maybe what got you into blockchain? What interests you about blockchain and mobility?
Sure. So, yeah, my name is Ann, and I'm the head of mobility and automotive at the IOTA Foundation. We're a nonprofit. We're based in Berlin, and we are developing a DLT solution that is feeless and designed for microtransactions and the Internet of Things. So, what really got me into DLT is in my previous position, I was the director of quality management for a voice over IP telephone company that's based in Berlin. And as part of that, I used to go visit our suppliers in China, and we used to have to do things like fill out the conflict minerals reporting. And what I saw there was just no trust. You couldn't trust what our manufacturers were saying. The processes were so complex for this minerals reporting. And when I heard about DLTs, I immediately thought, that would have solved all of my problems at this company. So that's really what got me into it.
It's wonderful to be here. It's been a long but very nice journey from May 2018 when we kicked off MOBI with a meeting in IBM. So yeah, I've been involved with MOBI since then. My career started off in the area of high-performance computing and system software. So I've seen the full gamut of enterprise evolution as relates to storage system software. And then I worked for a while in services, helping IBM's global technology services. And then mid-2005 or so, that's when I got into mobility and mobile computing, two different words, but very interconnected. And since then, I've been doing various projects at the intersection of mobility, mobile computing, blockchain, and AI, and as well as Internet of Things. So these are all technologies that started off in their own silos, but are really coming together in the world we live in today, which is very interconnected and is very interacting. And all these technologies are needed to provide and deliver the end user experience that consumers have been expecting of late. I think one of the interesting areas of research these days is the confluence of AI and blockchain. Johannes talked about how do you do ML analytics on data sets that you don't own. And then there's also adversarial machine learning. So that's one way of looking at things. Compare that to the blockchain world, where you are basically trying to transact between inherently untrusting parties in a manner that is acceptable to everybody. So there are very, very similar aspects, and I think that's a very interesting research area.
Hello. Wait. Hello. I'm Jack. I'm a co-founder of CPChain. CPChain is a cyber physics chain project, and I'm in charge of the product design and applications in this company. In the past 12 years, the Internet of Things is my working field. I used to work for Lucent in the Internet of Things department for many years. My job includes IoT platform, IoT applications, and the standards and patents. About 2 years ago, I entered the blockchain industry and built a cyber physics chain project as a co-founder. The basic idea behind the cyber physics chain project is that we believe that Internet of Things can help blockchain to succeed in the real-life applications, because sensors can help blockchain to connection information from the real physical world, and after that, with this data can be processed on the blockchain by the smart contract, and the smart contract will make decisions, and at last, through the actors of the internet, of IoT devices, the blockchain can come back to the real world. So this is the way, I think this is the way blockchain can influence real physical world. Yeah. And for the mobility industry, nowadays in every car there are lots of sensors are already embedded in every car. And in the future, in the V2X, I mean the vehicle to anything communications, there are lots of roadside unit devices were added in this system. So we do think with IoT, with blockchain, with mobility, there are huge market. So this is why we build, why we make applications on the mobility. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Meszaros. I am a managing director within Accenture Digital. I'm also the global blockchain lead for Accenture Digital. And my practice focuses on the intersection of blockchain and IoT. And I also have a financial services and payments background, so I have a heavy dose of commerce kind of interlaid. So I kind of bring all of the three pieces of this together, and that's why I'm so excited to be a part of Mobi. In terms of how I got started, actually, when I joined Accenture about 6 years ago, I was part of the IoT practice. And I was trying to figure out how my refrigerator would order milk and pay for it. And I understood that the basic economics of many of the banking transactions really weren't designed for micro transactions. And so from that perspective, I started thinking about what were other methods to be able to allow my smart fridge to order milk and pay for it. And I started looking at Bitcoin. And because I came from the financial industry, I knew something about it, but I'd never done a deep dive into Bitcoin. So I spent about a week and read everything that I could possibly find on Bitcoin. And midway through that week...
Which wasn't much back then.
Yeah, exactly.
You could do it in a week.
I really had to search. but what happened is about midway through that week, I came to the revelation that most of us do, that Bitcoin really wasn't the innovation, it was really blockchain underneath it that was the innovation. And as soon as I kind of understood that, I could see the use cases everywhere. And at that point, I went to the practice leadership and said, I'm starting a blockchain practice, and I haven't looked back since.
Great, thank you. So could I ask you each to talk a little bit about, and you're focused on automotive and mobility, the other three of you are more general, IoT, AI, broader blockchain focus. But you have done, I think each person has probably done some POCs, some projects in mobility and blockchain. Could I ask you each to just do a quick survey of the projects that you've done or your organizations have done? Rich, you want to start?
Sure. And to your point, from an automotive perspective, there's really been kind of three core areas that we've done work in so far. The first is really around the concept of a vehicle digital twin and thread enabled by a blockchain. And so if we think about the concept of a digital twin, and I think this is an area where maybe our language fails us a bit, we think about digital twin very specifically around design, engineering, manufacturing, and the feedback loop. But there's actually a life cycle of that vehicle much beyond that, for instance, that couple 2 to 3 months worth of activity associated with that vehicle. And so the idea here is how can we enable the ability to capture data from the vehicle, data from the OEM, and then data from the ecosystem across the entire 15 to 20 year life cycle of the vehicle. So that's kind of the first area that we see opportunity and that we're doing work in. The second is specifically around vehicle commerce and thinking about in-car commerce, thinking about vehicle-to-vehicle commerce, vehicle-to-merchant commerce, and then vehicle-to-infrastructure commerce and enabling that. As we think about the connectivity that's within our vehicles, the ability to streamline a lot of those everyday transactions, I think, is a really interesting area. The third area is really around identity, and it was mentioned earlier around self-sovereign identity. That's an area that Accenture has done a tremendous amount of work across a number of industries, and we're specifically also looking at it from a driver-rider perspective as it relates to the automotive industry, and then obviously how that also applies to the identity of the vehicle as well, which we're obviously very interested in the standard that Mobi released earlier in the summer.
Thanks.
Okay. I'd like to mention two of our POC projects here. Last week, on the BMW demo day in Beijing, cooperated with BMW China. We present an automatic EV charging solution based on decentralized vehicle ID technology in this demo day. And the second one is a decentralized data exchange market. It is named with PDASH. And this platform can be used in data exchange among vehicles. Upstairs, we have a booth there. You can see this introduce videos for these two POCs. Thank you.
So IBM as a company has a very large blockchain practice. We've done hundreds of POCs and many active engagements. So, and we like to start consortia. So if you think about the food trust or the trade digitization or trust your supplier, these are all active blockchain networks that are operating in the world out there. In the automotive space, we have also done work in all aspects, all aspects that cover all working groups of Mobi. Speaking about myself, I'm in one of the IBM's 12 research labs, and I've done a few projects in the blockchain space. So talking from the more general, we have a proof of concept that looked at using a relational database instead of a NoSQL database to store the blockchain data. And the rationale there is that decades have been spent in making relational database technology robust and highly transactional. So can we bring in some aspects of that? We've also done some work in the area of loyalty, where today many loyalty solutions rely on point-to-point integration between the consumer and a merchant. And a loyalty issuer typically has an ecosystem of partners, again, which is a very manual point-to-point onboarding. So blockchain technology allows you to, once you take the leap of faith for doing the initial onboarding, it's very easy to add new partners and also very easy to transact. And it allows cross loyalty system transactions very, very easily. So it enables new use cases. And then lastly, we've been doing work with Ford IT Research on decentralized identity and authenticating a rider for an autonomous vehicle. So if you think of Uber or Lyft today, when you order your ride and the car pulls up, how does the driver know to unlock the door? So there's a visual handshake that happens between the driver and the potential passenger. But tomorrow, when that car will be fulfilled by an autonomous vehicle, how will the vehicle know to unlock the door? So that's some of the things we're looking at. This was presented at IBM's Think conference earlier this year.
So, as I mentioned, IOTA is a nonprofit foundation. So our focus when it comes to projects and POCs is to enable the ecosystem and enable communities to work together to create projects. So there's 3 of them specifically in the automotive and mobility space I wanted to talk about. But we have projects across the board in any area you can think of, and in several of these areas that you guys have also mentioned. But one of the ones I wanted to bring up was a project that we have with Jaguar Land Rover, where they have integrated IOTA's technology into the software of the vehicle itself. And there is an IOTA wallet in the car, where in real time it can both send and receive payments. So for example, if you're driving down the road and your vehicle detects a pothole, it will then automatically transmit this information to the city authorities that, hey, you've got to go bring your maintenance crews out here and fix this pothole. And then the car will then be paid for this data that it's being given. So the vehicle itself, in this sense, is an autonomous economic agent. And then it will collect these payments and can then be used for parking or tolling or whatever to pay for those. So it's the full circle of that. Another area that we're very heavily involved in is smart charging. And one of our partners in the Netherlands called ALAD, they have developed an IOTA-enabled smart charger that is purely plug and play. There's no human interaction whatsoever. You just drive up with your vehicle, you plug it in to the smart charger, and all of the data and financial transactions are handled using the IOTA protocol. So again, there's no human interaction needed whatsoever. And this is what will get us on our way to these fully autonomous vehicles able to do all of this on their own. And then the final one that I wanted to mention is one of our partners based in Toronto, Canada. They're called Biotosphere. And they have used a Tesla to do a proof of concept of usage-based insurance. So in real time, the car, and you can see this online, you can go to Biotosphere's website and look at it, but real time, driving down the road based on driving conditions, the car chooses and pays for the insurance that covers those exact conditions. And this is running, as I said, real time, it's there, you can see it now, it's live.
Great, thanks. So a number of applications and some overlap between them. So far it's been me asking questions and you guys responding in a fairly structured way. I want to make it a little less structured now and ask a more open-ended question about future apps and dApps and what's the killer application here? For any new technology, it always takes a killer application to get acceptance, and by killer application, it's something that sort of everybody realizes they needed, but maybe didn't realize they needed before it was introduced. It's one where the technology is in the background, not the foreground. In other words, the application is not about the technology, but about solving some problem. For mobility and blockchain and the intersection between the two, what do you think the killer application is?
Well, I've got two. The first is, I mentioned this in my opening remarks, the whole concept of a digital twin and digital thread. I see this as a framework to enable a number of these use cases that we're all talking about up here. Ultimately, it's about sharing data in a new and collaborative way with more and more partners. As OEMs and others within the industry seek to be able to create these new mobility services, it takes data and insight to be able to do so. And so we need to figure out a way to be able to securely allow the right partners to get access to the right data for the right purpose for the right and defined time period. And that's really where I see a digital twin and thread enabled by a blockchain to be able to open up that entire ecosystem. Today, often, many OEMs have gone on a journey of creating a data lake, which is the ability to connect the vehicle digital twin and the number of their systems, their internal systems, to be able to create a common view of that vehicle. In some cases, they may have a design digital twin, an engineering digital twin, a manufacturing digital twin, and the ability to kind of bring that together in that data lake is a step in the right direction. But ultimately, we need access to that vehicle's in the wild, so we need access to the ecosystem that vehicle will exist in. And the data that from those third parties, whether it be dealerships, license bureaus, DMVs, merchants, all of those will provide incremental data and insight around the use, the condition of that vehicle as well, that can be the basis of enabling those services and these new capabilities. So that's one. The second is, I keep coming back to the transfer of value. When you look at blockchain, the real innovation here is the ability to have what I call an atomic transaction. So if you think about how money moves and payment and assets are transferred today, you have a notification of that transfer, then you have the actual transfer of value, and then someone comes in tomorrow morning and balances it. So you really have three transactions that you're trying to bring together. Blockchain brings that down into one transaction. Fundamentally, that will change every value transfer in the economy, full stop. Where I see that as a real value when we talk about in-car commerce is thinking about these micropayments and this pay-as-you-go commerce infrastructure that we all now can see is within our grasp because of these technologies.
So yeah, I'd like to build up on that. So I think a killer app by definition is something that is, as you said, is in the background. You're not aware of it. It scales and it's simple. So one use case of that is tolling, right? So in California, we have the smart tag that allows you to use the fast-track vehicles lanes, and seamlessly it charges your account. But so that exists today. How can blockchain help, right? So you have so many different jurisdictions. You have different states, each have their own system. If there was one unifying way in which blockchain could, with underlying blockchain platform, you could unify all these different automated tolling or parking or even EV charging mechanisms, I think that would be one killer app.
I think these are really good points. I think we can expand this, though, a bit, because right now we're talking about people who already own vehicles. And what we saw in some of these previous slides is that right now vehicles are only being utilized 5% of the time. And the trend also among millennials is that they don't want to buy a car. They just want to use it as a service. So I think for me, what a really killer app would be here is something like an Airbnb. We heard this before as well, but where individuals can share their vehicles using an app and have that be fully decentralized. And I think that would make it a killer app, because now you're getting people who don't have cars into this market and using DLTs, blockchain technology. I think this would also be a killer app in the sense that it would get the average person to use DLTs and be aware of it and maybe have it be a less scary technology.
Yeah.
So would this be some future version of Zipcar?
Actually, I'm thinking more an individual would be able to share their own personal
peer-to-peer.
vehicle. Yeah, peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
Reverse.
If I can extend that one step further as we think about level 5 autonomy, to your point, the cars are being used only 5% of the time. Well, if it's sitting in the parking lot while I'm at work, can the car do errands for me? Or potentially even recognize that it needs to come and pick me up. It's at 9 o'clock in the morning, it needs to pick me up at noon for a lunch. But in that time period, it could go, complete a couple of rides, for instance, earn a little bit of revenue so that my lunch is free.
Absolutely, yeah.
Takes it back to the digital commerce of the vehicle. Yeah, so that brings up an interesting point, which is that in the future autonomous taxi world, rideshare and car share, which are two different products today, converge and become one.
Yeah.
And as another aside, sorry, we'll get to you, Dr. Zhao. Just give you more time to think of your answer. The rideshare peer-to-peer car share app was one of the earliest ones that we did a POC on when I was at Toyota, and we showed it off at Consensus 3 years ago. It was actually built by Oaken Innovations, and they did it for $20,000. At the same time, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will. Toyota entered a partnership with a large San Francisco peer-to-peer car share company and spent about $10 million between the equity and another $10 million to develop the device to put in the car to do the same thing that Oaken had done for $20,000 on a blockchain. Anyway, sorry, Dr. Zhao.
Okay. In my opinion, I think data exchange may be one of the key apps, because in the future transportation system, every vehicle needs to communication with other vehicles or other IoT devices. It is very common to exchange data. With blockchain, with good design incentive mechanism, it can attract the vehicle owners and the device owners to share the data and to provide high quality data. So this is why I think data exchange will be one of the key app, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So great. So I think we actually have speakers talking about data, monetizing data exchange out of cars, vehicle commerce, and I think also some stuff on rideshare, car share coming up over the next day and a half. So great. In order to get there, gaps and missing links, what do we need? But before you answer that one, I just want to give people a heads up. Let's come up with a question or two from the audience for the panel as well. Right after we do gaps. So what are the gaps? What do we need to get there for the killer apps?
I think it starts with standards, which is one of the areas that obviously Mobi is focused on, because we need a common way to identify vehicles.
This is why we love you, Rich.
It's the basis of the ecosystem, because it's not just about a standard between the OEMs so we have a common language, but these vehicles will connect with the rest of the world. And so that's when the standard becomes really important. Do we really want to have a different identifier when we think about Shell connecting to a vehicle for fueling, for instance, or BP, et cetera? And so we need that standard. I think that's one element that's important. I think the second area here that I'd really like to stress is thinking about customer adoption at the forefront rather than an afterthought. And that's really about designing intuitive experiences that really drives the adoption and the desire for the customer to want to adopt into this new world. And this is really where the technology melds into the background. And this is what I really like to call this the Uberification of an experience. How many of us have walked out of a cab and the cabbie's chasing you because you forgot to pay? Because, exactly, we fundamentally, our experience, our expectation has changed because that technology has been the payment has been so seamlessly integrated into the experience. And I think we have that opportunity here. The last I would say is speed to market. The inventor or the founder of LinkedIn said, I think if I'm going to get this quote right, if you're not embarrassed by the first release of your product, you waited too long. And I think this is an important lesson for all of us. It's about getting out in the market, trying something, developing a minimum viable product, and then building on top of that in a very iterative process, not only does that allow us to learn and figure out what works and, quite honestly, what doesn't, but it also is a great way to engage the rest of the ecosystem to come work with us in order to change mobility as we know it today.
I think to build on that, another very important aspect is participation by all stakeholders. So, right, like take the example of standards. So we have a fairly good representation in our MOBI working groups from car manufacturers and smaller companies, consulting companies, larger companies. But wouldn't it be good to have government participation in some of these, right? Regulatory authorities. So again, that's a very important aspect of making anything real and tangible happen. You need participation from all the interested parties.
So we've got a conversation with a government coming up later this afternoon, so glad to hear you raise that one. Other gaps?
Well, also to expand a little on standardization, that was going to be my answer to the question as well. If we all aren't working together to create something that can all talk to each other, this vision that we're talking about over these 2 days just isn't going to happen unless that standardization is there. I mean, my background is in networking technology, IP security, and how many people in the room here remember token rings? Or, yeah. But all of that is gone. They didn't follow the networking standards. They didn't follow TCP/IP standards. Same thing around network security. I mean, IPsec is here now and used everywhere, VPNs, because of the strong standardization bodies that really push through the definition of these standards. And I think in this space, we have got to do this with OEMs, we have to do it with governments, regulatory bodies, cities, and consumers as well.
Okay. I think the ecosystem is most important for the future applications of blockchain in automobile. Because, but right now I think we need more POC projects with requirements from industry. And with these POCs, we can prove, we can bring trust or bring a real profit to industry. And after that, we can build this ecosystem and the blockchain will have a better future, I think.
Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, just a little bit of question here on what is the implication for, let's say, setting up standards and having an ecosystem in parallel to certain government entities that they might, let's say, something that they would prefer something that's more centralized, and how to achieve a broad adoption in this kind of context?
So the question is how to do it in a more decentralized way, and get broad adoption at the same time.
Yes, within the
certain. Mic closer to your face.
With some of the political events that's happening in the world today and certain governments' ideologies, and how would that imply on the future of blockchain and mobility as an ecosystem?
Okay, so the question is about governments and the implications, and I guess maybe that is a question about China, since China has just announced that they're getting in. What are the implications of that versus some of the governments, other governments that have gotten in different ways, maybe in less centralized ways? Yeah. So, Dr. Zhao, you want to take a crack at the China
yes,
piece of that?
Yes, I have some experience. 3 weeks ago, President Xi has announced that blockchain will be approved in China, and he mentioned 5 technology in this announcement. IoT and blockchain is 2 of these 5 technologies. And in my real life experience is that in the past 3 weeks, I lots of my friends from fintech, from telecom industry, from insurance industry, and from universities, from the government, they asked me to introduce blockchain to them. I never say this in the past 2 years. So I really feel there are huge chances happening in China for blockchain applications right now. Yeah, that's my experience. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on government centralization versus decentralization?
Go ahead.
So I think interoperability will be a key aspect of it, right? You could have governments like to mandate certain things. China and other countries are good examples, even the United States. So we have to make sure, that fragmentation does not happen like what happened with CDMA versus GSM. So interoperability is something we should keep in mind when we build these standards.
I'm actually involved in this particular issue with China with the current project. And I think, if we step back and think about the advantage of blockchain as it relates within this ecosystem, is it allows for transparency when we want it, but private when we need it. And so fundamentally at its core here, if we have regulations that kind of breaks that private when we need it, that's a bit challenging.
Also, slightly different perspective on this as well. We can also look to NGOs that are doing things with blockchain, I think, to increase the decentralized adoption of these types of technologies. For example, this is totally not mobility related, but in a way it is. At IOTA, we have a social impact team. We're working with groups at the UN to develop certification registries for refugees that are being stored in a DLT. So this is with the UN, and the idea is a lot of these refugees are highly educated, but when they go to a new country, they can't get jobs in their field. So these people are doctors, they're lawyers, and so if their credentials are kept in a global DLT, no matter where they go in the world, these credentials can be validated. And so again, this is a project of an NGO, and I think that will also help get this decentralized adoption going.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because this whole concept of self-sovereign ID and the ability that I have licensure or attestations that are about who I am and skills that I may have. I mean, we all know somebody who maybe have immigrated into another country and their professional license from their previous country is not valid in that new country until they take more schooling or take another test, et cetera. And so this just starts to break down some of those barriers and really allows us to truly understand the skills and capabilities that people have regardless of where they live in the world.
One thing to add that in China, if you do not connect blockchain with concurrency, it's okay. Yeah.
So, question.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask about the risk and liability from an insurance carrier perspective. Specifically, the Internet Identity Workshop that I attended for the very first time a couple months ago, one of the problems and challenges that they discussed was the agent problem, which is if I've given you the authorization, to drive my car as a valet service, then that's a different liability during that time frame that the valet is driving, versus if I let a friend borrow it for a week, that's a different liability framework. So I'm curious, how blockchain and what you guys think could solve for that problem from a carrier perspective.
So I think that is a good issue that you bring up. I think it's basically a question of solving the intersection of the identity of the driver and the identity of the vehicle. So once you have this vehicle identity enabled by DLT technology implemented, and you also have authorized drivers perhaps linked by a smartphone that the driver is carrying, you could have those kinds of ephemeral relationships and implications for insurance for those times.
So there's clearly quite a lot of innovators in this room, and you obviously talked about a nifty killer app idea. So I'd be curious as to your strategy, every one of your strategies, on how do you effectively time an innovation so that you're not ahead of the market when you're creating something that's, has a pretty big impact on revolutionizing an industry, whether you are maybe a small startup working out of your garage or a huge company that's just doing, micro innovations to create impact in their respective industries.
Yeah, we've seen some Moby members who are just incredible companies, right, but small startups who went through POC after POC with big automakers successfully. They did it right. They did everything right. They were successful in the POCs, but they ran out of their VOC funding because they were just too early. So it was sort of death by successful POC. So how do you time it right?
I think you can't. You can't. That's just the way innovation happens, right? I mean, there is a time and a place that's perfect for every technology. And I don't think that can be controlled by anybody. It's market conditions.
I personally feel that innovation is not something you do, it's something that you live. And so from that perspective, you're always innovating. It just depends on what area you're focusing on with that innovation today.
So I'll take a crack. I think most of the really disruptive unicorn scale companies have had maybe two characteristics. One is a new technology developed to the point, matured enough that suddenly something that wasn't monetizable before could be monetizable. And I point to Uber with the empty seat, right? There was no way to monetize the empty seat in a car, right, before you had the smartphone and the GPS and the ability to do payments on a credit card on a phone. And some reputation services as well. Airbnb, right? There was no way to monetize that spare bedroom. I mean, how would you do that, right? In a pre-smartphone, pre-internet world, you'd put your bedroom like in a newspaper, a spare bedroom for rent, one night only. It just doesn't work. The transactions cost, getting back to costs and this transaction cost issue, the transactions costs are just way too high for that business model to work. And so you have to have the technology come down, the transactions costs come down suddenly to where you can, right, where it makes sense that if you can just tip it to the tipping point and get scale, then it works.
You might have answered my question there, but some of the things that I've heard today with regards to congestion pricing or toll roads, and even the development of vehicles and additional parts that would have to be added so as to increase the cost. And even the gentleman from earlier today had mentioned a company called Go-Go Chicken, which people are buying chicken at a higher price. Is there the potential for blockchain to lower the cost of goods so that us as consumers can effectively pay less for it?
Absolutely. So I can give you the example of trade digitization. So it used to take a lot of paper-based transfer of documents as well as analysis by humans to track a shipment. That's something that can be done in a matter of a few minutes now with DLT-enabled technology. The other one is, saving, let's say, saving healthcare costs. So let's take the foodborne illnesses, right? It used to take a lot of time, or the order of days, to track where a case of produce came from. Now, with DLT-enabled technology, you can do that in a matter of a few minutes. So when you have a foodborne contamination that causes an outbreak, it's very easy to localize it and identify the exact cases of produce that might have caused it. So that's not exactly lowering costs, but it's saving healthcare costs and lives.
I think when we look at use cases from a blockchain perspective, kind of a cross-industry perspective, one of the first places that we all look for value is in the kind of the efficiency side of reconciliation, exceptions, balancing, and that typically can be somewhere between 20 to 30% of any company's cost structure is baked into those back office activities. And so if you can start to streamline that through a use case, you can start to realize that value. Now, whether or not that comes in the form of reduced cost to the end consumer, or that those savings are invested in the next wave of innovation, that's obviously a company's strategic choice.
Okay, we're a little over 4 minutes left. Can you each take a minute? Think of the crazy, fun application for the future of mobility, autonomous cars connected by blockchain, paying for things. What's out there in the reaches of your imagination?
Chris has heard me say this. I'd like to buy a green light, please. and that's really where I'm interested in seeing is how we can leverage this infrastructure for right of way. And that could be, I'm running to the airport and I need a green light because I'm going to miss my flight, to, I'm on the way to work and I know it's going to be tight and I've got an important meeting and I'd like to find out where the available parking spot is and I'd like to reserve that spot and pay for that spot. So, I think this whole concept of right of way, I think, is a really interesting area of kind of this pay-as-you-go commerce.
Yeah, I'm going to go out there and drive really slow in the fast lane just so people will pay me to get out of the way.
It's a revenue opportunity.
I think in the future, every not just vehicles, every IoT devices will get a wallet, and they can exchange data and send transactions with this wallet based on the blockchain technology.
So I think if you take the case of trains, right, you have a train that goes from one location to another. But wouldn't it be nice if I wanted to go up to a particular place and some kind of DLT-based application directed me to a particular compartment, and I board that, and then at a particular station, that compartment gets disengaged from the rest of the train and then connects with some other train that's going to where I want to go. And if you take that to a shuttle, or maybe to even a convoy of cars that does exactly that, that would be a wild idea.
So I spent some time with Gil Pratt, who was the head of autonomous driving at Toyota, visiting some of his colleagues who were senior researchers at Amazon. And these are the people who basically the MIT doing research of the type that you're doing at Almaden. And they were talking about their vision for the future. And they said, oh, well, we vision this world where physical things, right, get shuttled around, right, because they have tags on them. They said, our vision, we would have called it the Internet of Things, but of course that's already taken. So maybe we'll call it the Internet of Atoms, this idea that we can shuttle physical things around in the same way that packets are shuttled around on the Internet.
So this is maybe not as crazy as some of these other things out there, but a company called ADOG recently showed off their prototype CityBot unit at IAA this past September, and I really love this idea because what it is, it's all these autonomous vehicles that live in a city center, and basically there's no more private vehicles on the road. So the city center is completely fresh air, you can ride your bike, and these city bots have the front compartment and a back compartment that can be exchanged. And so during the day, these are your autonomous vehicles for transporting people. In the evening, the back part gets exchanged, and maybe it's used to take out the trash. And I love this vision of the future where these vehicles are owned by the city, and it takes care of a lot of these problems for us, reduces congestion, and makes cities a lot nicer places to be.
Yeah, in terms of the economics of mobility as a service, it's all about utilization, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you can use the vehicles for one purpose at night and another purpose during the day, and get that 5%, right, up to
95.
Yeah, well, look at the model is the airline industry, right? Where every moment an airline sits on the ground is opportunity cost and opportunity lost. I think our industry will become much more like the airline industry because the economics will drive it that way. All right, so our time is up. Some of these ideas can actually be seen upstairs, demonstrated in the booths. at least in rudimentary forms, car wallets, vehicles, negotiating rights of way, trust scores, shared coordinated autonomy, loyalty and reputation, and so on. So please spend some time up there talking to the people in the booths. Thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists.